Emotion reading from faces. Another ability that can effectively aid social interactions is the ability to gather information beyond identity from faces. In this section, the ability to read emotion from faces, a topic that has been studied in depth with chimpanzees by Parr and her colleagues, will be considered. Several facial expressions in chimpanzees, like those that occur during play, a relaxed open mouth face, submission, a bared teeth display, screaming, an open mouth with teeth showing, and pant hoot vocalizations, and open mouth with extended lips, are readily noticeable by human observers. Images of these expressions have been used in a match-to-sample procedure, MTS, similar to the match-to-sample procedures described in Chapter 3. Here, a sample image is matched to one of two other images on a single particular stimulus dimension, e.g. type of facial expression. For example, an image of chimpanzee A with a scream face could be matched to chimpanzee B's scream face, but not chimpanzee C's play face. Chimpanzees could match photographs of different chimpanzees who were emitting the same expression, but then the task was modified slightly, such that chimpanzees had to match images in terms of likely associated contexts. Chimpanzees watched videotaped events depicting either positive scenes, e.g. favorite toys, foods, or negative scenes, e.g. veterinarians with tranquilizer darts, and were presented with two images of facial expressions, e.g. for positive, a play face, and for negative, a scream face. Chimpanzees made appropriate matches, suggesting that they were linking the likely underlying emotions to the scenes with actual depictions of facial expressions. The mechanism underlying the correct matching still requires additional study, but it could be based on a form of emotional contagion. See Chapter 11, in which the situations engendered certain emotions in the participants who were then matched to the facial expression. It is also possible that the chimpanzees' choices were based on a learned association between these types of events and the accompanying facial expressions of conspecifics, or even an understanding of the meaning of the facial expression that allows consideration of possible causes. Thinking about thinking. In 1978, Premack and Woodruff tested whether an adult female chimpanzee, Sarah, had a theory of mind. That is, did Sarah recognize that those around her had minds and mental states like intentions and beliefs, which guided their behavior? Sarah was presented with videotyped scenarios of a human actor who was trying to solve a variety of problems. In one event, for example, an actor was struggling to get food that was placed just out of reach. The tape was paused before the actor solved the problem, and Sarah was provided with two photographs to choose from, one of which depicted the solution to the problem, e.g. the person picking up a long stick to rake in the food, and one that did not, e.g. picking up a short stick. In 21 out of 24 trials with different scenarios such as this, Sarah chose the photograph depicting the correct solution. This is truly a fascinating finding, but one obvious interpretation is that Sarah's behavior might not have reflected an understanding of the actor's mental states, his intentions and desires, but what she knew about the laboratory environment. It is possible that, in each case, she chose the picture that fit with a familiar sequence of events that she had witnessed before. For example, Sarah may have observed long tools being used to reach food in the past and associated the two. Still, it would be wrong to dismiss the study altogether, especially considering the research it inspired during the decades that followed and up to present day. Not only is social cognitive research on theory of mind with animal species being completed, but also human developmental psychologists have made great strides in charting the ontogeny, development, of this ability, and researchers studying developmental disabilities such as autism have come to recognize a core deficit in mental representation in the disorder. At this point, there is no straightforward yes or no answer to whether chimpanzees or any other species other than humans have a theory of mind, but the research has suggested that there are likely many ways in which animals can interpret the behavior of others. A recurring debate in this and the next two sections, for example, will be whether animals respond in experimental tasks based on past experience and learned behavior rules, or whether they are also able to represent certain mental states. Mental attribution. When adult humans observe someone's behavior, A representation is created that includes such elements as the physical actions, the setting, and the internal mental states, e.g., feelings, desires, emotions, beliefs, and intentions. These mental states are the assumed causes of the behavior. He reached for the ice cream sundae on the counter because he wanted to eat it, or she looked in the cupboard because she believed that the coffee mug was in there. Often, mental state attribution will allow us to make predictions about future actions. He will likely eat ice cream again when given the chance, or she will look for the coffee mug elsewhere if she does not find it in the cupboard. In this way, mental state attribution is very powerful as a means of understanding the actions of others and interacting effectively with them. It allows people to act kindly, offer him a sundae after our next dinner, or even deceptively, secretly move the coffee cup to a new location after she puts it away in the cupboard. Indeed, difficulties in mental state attribution can have dramatic effects as observed in individuals with autism. See Box 10.2. Box 10.2, Autism. Imagine a silent animated movie starring the shapes seen in the figure below, figure 10.6. There is a rectangle with a slit that can open and close, a big rectangle, a small rectangle, and a small circle. The objects are animated in such a way as to depict a story. For example, provided with a 50-second clip, a typically developing teenager might describe what he saw as the following. What happened was that the larger triangle, which was like a bigger kid or a bully, and he had isolated himself from everything else until two new kids came along, and the little one was a bit more shy, scared, and the smaller triangle more like stood up for himself and protected the little one. The big triangle got jealous of them, came out, and started to pick on the smaller triangle. The little triangle got upset and said, "What's up? Why are you doing this?" In contrast, an adolescent with autism might describe the scene in this manner. The big triangle went into the rectangle. There was a small triangle and a circle. The big triangle went out. The shapes bounce off each other. The small circle went inside the rectangle. The big triangle was in the box with the circle. The small circle and the triangle went around each other a few times. They were kind of oscillating around each other, maybe because of a magnetic field. The movies were originally designed by Hyder and Simmel in 1944 and have since been used by autism researcher Klin to examine spontaneous mental attribution in individuals with autism. Autism is a spectrum disorder, and individuals may have a wide range of characteristics from low to high IQ and little language to full language abilities, and a very small subset have savant-like capabilities in a specific domain. One fairly common characteristic, however, is poor social interactions. Many researchers subscribe to the theory that individuals with autism have limitations in their theory of mind abilities, and one can see this play out in the descriptions of the movie seen above, as well as difficulties in false belief tests, described later in this chapter. The extent of the limitations and the affected cognitive mechanisms are still being determined. Indeed, this research must progress alongside human developmental psychology research as it attempts to chart typical theory of mind development. Further, comparative research can aid in characterizing human social cognitive mechanisms via comparison with other species. For example, by considering differences between species in terms of social cognitive processes, we become more aware of possible cognitive systems that are alternatives to mental state attribution. Importantly, mental states are internal to an individual, so to attribute a mental state means that, for example, one might offer a person a sundae not solely because that person was observed to reach for one last week, observable behavior, but because one thinks that person likes and wants ice cream, invisible, positive mental state. Many developmental psychologists assume humans readily reason about the mental states of others by at least 4 years of age. Humans are a verbal species and can thus report our attributions directly, and pass a wide variety of experimental procedures designed to test mental attribution. It is much harder to examine whether any non-human animal species, or even human infants, engage in mental state reasoning. Verbal answers to test questions are, of course, not available. Further, as with Premack and Woodruff's study with Sarah the chimpanzee, it is difficult to determine whether the subjects are actively attributing mental states or coming up with the correct answer by some other means. Alternatives to mental attribution. As noted above, Sarah the chimpanzee could have performed well on the experimental tasks by means of associative learning. She may have linked certain situations and elements of her environment and responded accordingly, e.g., a picture of a person holding a hose is associated with a picture of a hose attached to a spigot more than a hose not attached, because the former events have been common in her environment. In this sense, Sarah may not have been considering the behavior of others at all. Other cognitive processes that also do not involve the attribution of invisible internal mental states can lead to correct performance as well. Animals may, for example, only represent and reason about behaviors, yet perform on a task in a manner that would otherwise suggest that they also engaged in mental state reasoning. Most experimental procedures involve tests designed with the idea that in a given situation, if a subject responds in a certain way to the behavior of others, it must be via mental state attribution. A problem for researchers, however, is that perhaps the subject is just responding on the basis of the behavior it was observing. To take an example from Pavanelli and Vonk, 2004, that will be expanded upon in section 10.4, imagine a chimpanzee observing two experimenters, one wearing a blindfold and one not blindfolded. The chimpanzee must decide whom to approach with a food-begging gesture. If the chimpanzee approaches and begs from the experimenter without the blindfold, which is actually not what was found in the real study, but this is just a thought experiment, a possible interpretation is that the chimpanzee gestured to this experimenter because he or she knows that only people who can see them can respond appropriately to begging. Here, the mental state of seeing is being attributed. However, it is also possible that the chimpanzee gestured to this experimenter because he or she knows that only people with visible eyes respond to begging. The latter possibility is an example of reasoning based solely on representations of behavioral contingencies and regularities without reference to mental states. In the next two sections, there will be discussion of how animals, and in some cases human infants and young children, reason about the behavior of others. Of primary interest is whether they reason directly from behavior or whether they consider both behavior and the mental states that drive it. Three mental states will be discussed: intention, perception, and knowing. There is good reason for considering these mental states separately within a more general consideration of theory of mind. Developmental psychologists often posit that understanding certain mental states, e.g. seeing, emerges earlier in development than reasoning about other mental states, e.g. beliefs. Additionally, some comparative researchers have proposed that during the course of primate evolution, mental state reasoning may have evolved in discrete steps, thus making it possible to find a shared understanding of, say, seeing across species, but differences in reasoning about other mental states. Understanding intentions. For humans, the ability to understand others as intentional agents is critical for many aspects of our social lives. This section will consider both the developmental research completed with infants and young children, as well as analogous work with animals, primarily primate species, on understanding intentions. By intentions, many researchers are referring to mental states like wanting or desiring that lead agents to complete certain actions. In turn, these actions are often referred to as goal-directed actions. Of course, sophisticated mental attribution can include additional mental states, e.g. she wants the toy and believes it is in the box, but here the focus will be on intentions. Infants' detection of goal-directed action. Human infants recognize the boundaries in an action stream that are related to the initiation and completion of intentions. 10-month-olds look longer at events in which action is paused in the middle of a goal action, as opposed to events in which the pause occurs after a goal has been completed. Infants also seem to have interpretations about the goals themselves. After witnessing a person repeatedly reach and grasp one of two toys, 6-month-old infants expected the person to continue to reach for that particular goal toy, even if its location had been moved. Infants will also attribute goals to non-human agents. Using computer-animated objects, e.g. balls, with features such as non-rigid transformations and self-propulsion, Georgely and colleagues, 1997, found that 12-month-olds develop expectations about the trajectories of objects based on their apparent goal-directedness. In that study, looking time measures suggested that infants assumed that a ball that had approached another ball in a rational, efficient manner, e.g. jumped over an obstacle blocking its path, would subsequently approach the goal ball in a straight-line trajectory if the obstacle was no longer there, as opposed to repeating its jumping action. Many developmental researchers have interpreted these results and others to mean that by at least 6 months of age and perhaps earlier, infants view certain actions as goal-directed. But what is meant by goal-directed can vary. Some researchers claim that infants are only reasoning about behavior, and some claim they are reasoning about mental states such as the desires that cause behavior. In the task by Woodward described above, for example, infants may be reasoning that the person grasped the toy, behavior, or they may be reasoning that the person grasped the toy because she wanted it, behavior and mental state. Another, slightly humorous way of thinking about this distinction is to consider the joke, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" The standard answer is based only on behavior, to get to the other side. The mentalistic reasoning answer, however, is different. It wanted to get to the other side. Both types of reasoning lead an observer to make predictions based on the actions observed. The person might grab for the same object in a new situation, or the chicken may cross other roads it comes upon, but only one is considered mental attribution. Both types of reasoning tend to be called goal attribution in infant literature. To be sure, infants do seem to be encoding the end state of actions as important, and they are not just considering actions in terms of physical movement alone. That is, infants at least form the behavioral representation that, for example, the ball went to the other ball, as opposed to simply the ball is moving toward the right. The question that developmental researchers often face is when and how the infant comes to represent both behavior and underlying mental states. Research with animals is currently facing the same conundrum. See also box 10.3 for future considerations. Figure 10.7, testing the interpretation of goal-directed action. In Wood et al. 2007, 3 primate species observed a human actor reach for and grasp one of 2 potential food containers. With access to the containers, the majority of observers chose to inspect the container that had been grasped. When the actor's behavior was portrayed as accidental, subsequent choices were directed equally to each container. Okay, so you can see when they do an intentional hand grasp, the monkeys will choose that container, but an accidental hand flop, they realize it's an accident. They don't try to get food from that container more. Box 10.3, mirror neurons. Great excitement followed the discovery of mirror neurons in the rhesus macaque. Neurons in the premotor cortex fire when monkeys reach for and grasp objects, and intriguingly, some of these neurons also fire when the monkey observes another monkey doing the same action. Human brains seem to have analogous regions. Figure 10.6. Figure 10.6. Neurons in the premotor cortex fire during the observation and enactment of certain actions. The ventral premotor cortex. Some researchers have theorized that mirror neurons are the means by which we attribute goals, intentions, and beliefs to others. In one experiment, researchers took advantage of the fact that monkey mirror neurons respond to actions that are directed toward objects, i.e. a grasp, but not to a mimed version of the same action, i.e. a grasp with no object present. Monkeys were shown events in which an object was or was not placed behind an occluding screen, followed by a hand reaching behind the screen. Thus, the actions were the same, but in one case, they were directed toward an unseen object. Mirror neurons fired when the occluded object was grasped, but not when the object was not present, suggesting that the neurons respond to more than just the external physical features of an action. Instead, they only seem to respond to actions that are directed toward goals. A question still remains, however. Do these mirror neurons really represent the internal states, e.g. wanting the object, of the actor? Further research is required, and for now, many researchers question whether these neurons are responsible for anything more than interpreting the physical movement of an action, and perhaps making predictions as to probable end states of the action. In any case, There will no doubt be many future studies on the mirror neuron system, elucidating its role in social cognitive processes. Interpretation of goal-directed action by animals. Some of the experimental tasks completed with human infants have been slightly modified to be used with non-human primates. Eller, for example, has tested infant chimpanzees using the procedure that George Lee and colleagues have developed. Like human infants, looking time measures suggested that the young chimpanzees interpreted the actions of an animated ball as directed toward a goal, and the chimpanzees assumed that the ball would continue to approach the goal in a rational, efficient manner in a new context. Additionally, Wood and colleagues tested 3 primate species in a task based on the Woodward 1998 study. 2 monkey species, tamarins and rhesus macaws, as well as chimpanzees, observed a human actor reach for and grasp one of 2 potential food containers, figure 10.7, when subsequently given access to the containers. The majority of observers, regardless of species, chose to inspect the container that had been grasped. Interestingly, not just any type of action on a container would lead to it being chosen. If the actor accidentally made contact with a container, subsequent choices were at random. Both of these tasks can be solved by reasoning about behavior without reference to mental states, e.g., the ball moved toward the other ball and the person grasped that container. But some have pointed out that tasks including unintentional actions like the accidental condition in Wood et al. 2007 may allow for conclusions based on mental state attribution. The logic of this argument is that when an agent's action leads to successful goal completion, the desired intention matches the outcome of the behavior, and thus it is virtually impossible to distinguish when a participant is reading behavior or reading behavior and positing a mental state. In accidents and failed actions, however, the intention and the behavioral outcome do not match. Using this logic, in tests incorporating accidental actions, Call and Tomasello have suggested that chimpanzees do understand the goals of others with reference to mental states. In one study, chimpanzees responded differently to situations in which an agent did not give them a food treat because he was unwilling to do so or because he was unable and failed to do so. Note that in this case, the outcome is the same. The chimpanzee receives no food. However, the underlying intentions of the agent differ, and appropriately, chimpanzees left the testing arena earlier and became more agitated when the actor was unwilling to give food. Other studies have also suggested chimpanzees' understanding of intentions, showing that chimpanzees react differently to accidental versus intentional actions, that they help people who are unable to reach an object, and that they will copy intentional actions on novel objects more than accidental actions. The authors of these studies propose that the novel nature of the actions and the objects that the actions work upon, as well as the variety of tasks that are used, suggest that something akin to the spontaneous attribution of intentions is present. Understanding, seeing, and knowing. In their original paper described above, Premack and Woodruff proposed several methods for testing whether an animal's theory of mind extends to the appreciation that seeing leads to knowing. Using terminology from Call and Tomasello 2008, this research question can be rephrased as, can animals understand what someone else sees, what he registers from the environment, or even what he knows, what information he has previously registered?